Understanding the best way to assemble your pedal board is something that a lot of amateur home and DIY players struggle with all the time. And to be able to find the right information about your rig specifically and be able to maybe take more generalized advice on YouTube and apply it to what you're doing can be a difficult task. Some rig builders, including us, offer services to be able to pay to get that sort of consultation. But what I wanted to do today is to actually give some people some free advice, and hopefully some of these rigs that we're going to be advising on is something that you can then take and implement into your own rig. And I think that this is going to be something that we're going to be doing on an ongoing basis so that we can offer some free consulting advice to all of you that are regularly engaging on our social media and here on YouTube. So what we're going to do today is look at several different rigs that have come to us through Instagram. We put out a posting earlier this week asking people to tag us in photos of their rig, give us their signal path, and then we'll go through and kind of critique the rig a little bit and then give them some actionable advice that they can take to then improve and transform the rig for better sound or quieter operation, or how to make it more reliable overall. Now today I'm not going to be focusing so much on aesthetics. We do have some videos that go into detail about how to create nice, neat wiring looms. And the reason why I'm not going to critique really on aesthetics for this is because as far as the sound or the quality of the pedal board, most of the aesthetics that you see with neat wiring looms, it's not so much translating into a better sound. It's usually just more for better organization, maybe better troubleshooting. But for the most part, having a really neat and beautiful pedal board doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to sound good. Our main focus, however, today is going to be really looking at what we always refer to as the Holy Trinity of Tone. And observing the Holy Trinity of Tone ensures that your pedal board not only sounds great, but is reliable and is going to be something that you're going to be able to use for years to come with as little to no complications as possible. Now those three things, of course, are using a high quality isolated, preferably switch mode power supply, using high quality shielded and soldered cables, and also using high quality buffers on the input and output. And we'll get into some of those specifics and how they apply to these rigs as we go into the video. As always, if you have any feedback or things that you might add to some of these suggestions that I'm going to give to some of these rigs, of course you're welcome to put those in the comments below. And if you have a rig that you would like advice like this on, you can of course always join us over on Patreon to get some paid services and advice along these lines, or over on therigdr.com where we offer specific tone consultations. If you want more details about the Holy Trinity of Tone, again, the switch mode power supplies that are isolated, the buffers, the cabling, we have a video specifically on that, and also individual DIY videos showing you how to make things like buffers, your own power cables, and how to route nice power supply runs going from your pedals into the power supply. So I've opened up Instagram, I'm looking at some photos here of different rigs, and let's start first with the one that was tagged first for us, and this is from ProDigAlb_. And he's got a cool rig. It looks like it's on a pedal train platform. He's got the new Corey Wong pedal, the Optimus. It's got some cool stuff on here for sure. So he says, hoping to get some tips from the rig doctor himself. Plays a wide range of genres. And if there's something to consolidate, I'm all for it. Okay, so his signal path is tuner, Wampler Ego Compressor, Zevex Fuzz Factory, Wah, Boss Auto Wah, Polytune Octave, or Poly Blue Octave, Whammy DT, Optimus, Walrus, Warhorn, Ages OD, Rat, PG-14, Flashback Delay, Marine Layer Reverb, and Looper. And I'd say for the most part, I don't know that I have any immediate objections to what he's got here in terms of his signal path. A couple of things that I would consider just thinking of the signal path so far is generally things like the whammy or the octave. Those do really well in triggering the closer they are to the guitar. If you want the detuned aspect, let's say, of the whammy, the closer that is to the guitar, the more that dynamic change is obviously triggered through the whammy, but it also is then brought through the rest of your signal path. So generally I think about something like the whammy actually being right up front, and maybe even the MXR Poly Blue Octave also being up front. Now the ZVEX Fuzz Factory is another thing to consider here. Sometimes when we're dealing with fuzzes, you can have some impedance sensitivities, and the ZVEX Fuzz Factory does have some things about it that are a little bit unusual. You would want to think about whether you would want that fuzz sound going into something like the octave or the whammy, or if you'd want it to be before. I think it depends on whether you'd use those things together or not would determine whether the fuzz could be before or after. So there could be a case to be made to put the fuzz first and then go whammy and octave, or go whammy, octave, and then fuzz, or whammy, fuzz, and then octave, depending on what combinations of things are on. In terms of the delay signal path or the time-based signal path, I think the flashback reverb looper is fine. You could of course reverse the order of delay and reverb, which we've talked about doing in a few videos. And then as far as the overdrive and distortion section is concerned, I usually like to go from the greatest amount of distortion closer to the guitar and the least amount of distortion furthest from the guitar. And that really is going to depend on how you use these particular pedals, because there's some pedals that maybe in a normal setting might be lower gain than others, but you use them perhaps at a higher gain setting and use maybe some of your higher gain pedals at lower gain settings. These are things that are sort of specific to the user, and I would adjust them in the order with which you use them in terms of the amount of distortion, again with the highest gain closest to the guitar and the lowest gain furthest from the guitar. And the reason again for that is that when you have something that's already super gained out and you run an overdrive before it, you're just saturating it further. It's more of a mess and it rarely sounds better. There are some conditions, some certain pedals that maybe that works for, but in a general sense, I usually like to have the highest gain closer to the guitar and the least gain furthest from the guitar in terms of the overdrive sequence. Now, I don't see here what the power supply is, so I'm not sure, but one thing I can say about any sort of pedal train style or style of pedal board where the power supply is underneath, you definitely want to make sure you're using switch mode here, because a linear power supply is going to have the magnetic field going right into where basically the flashback and the marine layer and even the ZVEX are. So this could potentially create some noise there because of any of the leakage coming off that toroidal transformer. Switch mode, this is not a problem, and it's not even something you need to be concerned about in terms of where pedals sit in relationship to that. Now it looks like he's kind of got a combination potentially of maybe some pre-made soldered cables and maybe some molded cables. You could of course upgrade here to go all soldered with, Mogami 2524, 2319, 2314. There's a lot of different options out there and really not too expensive. Most of the Mogami cable is, 40 or 50 cents per foot. So that could be a good way to go. I don't see anything about specific buffering. You get some buffering from that chromatic tuner from Boss on the front, but it's not exactly the lowest output impedance. May be okay. The looper at the end of the chain, the Ditto, is true bypass, but if it's in use, it's 100 ohms. I'm not sure what the marine layer is, if that's an always-on effect, what the output impedance is. I think most of the Fender stuff is 1K, so you might benefit from having an output buffer at the least as a nice low output impedance. We have some great recommendations of that in the description below. So I think that about does it for this one. Let's move on to the next. All right, this one is from Ben's Tranny.99. So this is his current pedal board. It's a nice compact rig. He's got a TC Hypergravity Mini, I think that's a compressor, EHX Soul Food, a Mojo Mojo Overdrive, a Boss DS1, and then a Boss MD500 for modulation, then has a Zoom MS70, which is like a multi-effect that's in a small compact unit, and looks like he's got a nice Strat here. I don't know, and the power supply used is a True Tone CS6. Okay, so I like this. This is a nice, small, compact rig. Looks really tight and nice for traveling. So I think he's got a couple of things going on here in terms of the Holy Trinity tone. It looks like he has maybe some soldered cables. I don't know exactly what the cables are, but they do look like they are soldered from what I can see. He's using a high quality power supply here in the CS6. It's a great power supply, especially for small rigs like this. The CS6 is kind of a really narrow, more rectangular and low profile power supply. I don't know if the Gravity has a buffer built into it. That may be an always-on pedal, and if that's the case, maybe that could act as a buffer. And I don't know what the output impedance is of the last pedal, the Zoom. or whether that is buffered. You may consider in this case using an input and an output buffer to make sure that you're getting that nice low impedance throughout the system. Even though you only have a couple of pedals, obviously you're still seeing the full capacitance of whatever cabling is coming in and going out of the pedal board. But I think overall, I like the power supply situation here. I like that you're using soldered cables. I don't know again what cables they are, but I think soldered is at least a good place to start. Using high quality buffers could be a good addition to this, depending on whether the gravity is always on, what that impedance is, and equally if the zoom is in buffered mode and what that output impedance is. This looks like a nice compact rig overall. I definitely don't have too many objections here on the materials, the stuff that's used. It looks pretty good overall to me. All right, and this one is from N8 Guitarist, or maybe that's Nate Guitarist, and this is a cool one. This one's got a switcher on it. It's got lots of pedals. Let's see what we got. Nate Guitarist, he says here's what he's got. He's got a JHS buffer, a Walrus compressor, a Strymon Mobius, a Boss switch, maybe it means a switcher that has a split to tuner, and then a POG Morning Glory TS9 Kilt Deco Mobius Prestige, which I think is a boost, volume pedal, I'm presuming, Timeline Big Sky. First of all, Holy Trinity of Tone wise, we can see he's got the Ojai and the Zuma, so two great power supplies, switch mode right off the bat. Looks like he's got soldered cables from what I can see. These look like square plugs on the ones at least that are exposed. If that's the case, I fully approve of that message, using soldered cables. Square plugs are wonderful. Of course, there are some alternatives that could also work here. Mogami cable, potentially, that's a great one, but again, there's other alternatives that could work. The Boss switcher is actually, for the money, I think is a great deal. It's got reorderable loops, which is really a cool feature to have, and doing that kind of Strymon bridge type thing like he's got here with the 3 Strymon pedals upstairs and the trifecta. And the ES5, you can control all those with MIDI and have really the same functionality as though they were plugged into the switcher itself, so you don't have to waste loops in controlling those. As far as the buffering is concerned, the JHS buffer is kind of similar to a Klon buffer, and although the Klon is a wonderful overdrive, it is not a great buffer in terms of its fidelity or its ability to drive a lot of capacitance. So I would recommend that actually the input buffer be switched to something that's a little more linear, doesn't use a TLO72 chip. That's not really a great choice for something that's going to be colorless, that has a very intense and extreme kind of color to the sound, so I wouldn't recommend using that as far as a transparent buffer. Now, if you like the sound of that buffer and you're not going for neutral, then of course keep it. But if you want the sound of your guitar plugged into your amp and as close to that as possible, I would go with something that's a little bit more transparent. And again, we have lists of our approved buffers in the description below, and that could be on the input and the output, but you could actually also use the Big Sky as your output buffer because that has 100 ohm output impedance, is actually very good sounding, and we have a video about pedals with good built-in buffers, and the Strymon pedals are listed as those types of pedals that have great built-in buffers, so that set to the buffered mode might be just fine. Overall, I think this rig looks really solid and definitely is observing a lot of those strategies that we talked about in the Holy Trinity of Tone. All right, this one is from Jeff Saunders Music. Now, Jeff has got a cool rig here. He says, roast my board. We're not gonna roast it. We're gonna improve it. So we got a Polytune 3, and this one looks like it's the Bonafide, so that has a buffer in it. Tone Corset, Muffaletta, Angry Charlie, Spark, Dude, Wazacraft Blues Driver, Terraform, DD200, and Oceans 11. Straight off the bat, we got the mini wah. All right, so with the wah, and I actually forgot that he shows that the wah comes before the Polytune. Now this is a smart idea because a lot of the vintage style wahs, even if they are newly made but representative of the original vintage style, a lot of those wahs don't sound so good when you put a buffer in front of them. So he's got guitar coming right into wah, that's true bypass. Not really any consequence to put that before the buffer because basically it's just the same as maybe elongating your input cable by a few inches would be the equivalent of the wah and bypass between all the circuitry that might go between the input jack, the foot switch, and then the output jack before it gets to the input buffer, which is in the Polytune, which has a high quality buffer, 1 meg input impedance, 100 ohm output impedance. Presuming that buffer is engaged, hopefully he's doing that. So that looks good. Then he's going into the Tone Corset. That looks good. I think that's kind of like a OCD-ish, if I recall. The Muffaletta, You know, you could make a case depending on, you know, what setting you're using on the muffletta. I don't remember whether the muffletta has those impedance sensitive versions of the big muffs, but that's something you can experiment with as far as before or after the buffer. So that has a potential to even go earlier, potentially even after the wah, depending on how you're liking the sound of it. Angry Charlie looks good. I would reverse the Spark Dude Wazacraft Blues Driver, because the Spark is a pretty linear boost. It's just adding more output. If you put it into those pedals, it's just going to saturate them more. If you put them after it, it's going to basically act like a master volume boost, like if you had a boost channel on your amp. So I'd recommend putting that later, but maybe Jeff likes this to add more saturation to these other pedals, like the Dude and the Wazacraft Blues Driver. Terraform, nice multi-effects modulation. DD200, great delay. Ocean's 11, I don't know what the output impedance of the Ocean's 11 is. If it's low, like let's say lower than maybe 200 or 300 ohms, then it might work okay if it has a buffered mode. Otherwise, you might consider putting a buffer at the end of the signal chain just to make sure everything makes it back to the amplifier. It looks like you're using all soldered cables here. You know, of course, you could always upgrade if you wanted to get something different. Then looks like you got some Ernie Ball here, some Fender here, kind of a potpourri of soldered cables. I think it's certainly better than going solderless, but you could, of course, maybe upgrade those in the future. It might actually allow you to fit more pedals on there potentially, because you won't be competing with those really large profiles of some of the right angle jacks. But I think overall this looks good. I don't see what the power supply is, but again, on any sort of pedal train board, it's best to go with a switch mode power supply, because if you use a linear power supply, you're going to be putting that toroidal transformer and any of that magnetic leakage right in the path of a lot of these pedals. And if you're curious to know more about linear versus switch mode power supplies, we have a video on that details the advantages of one over the other. But I think overall here, looking really good. All right, next we have Mark_Thackway. This is a really nice, simple rig. Looks like he's a fan of the Grateful Dead. Very nice. And he's got real simple rigs. So it goes into the Road Rage, which is an on-off buffer. Okay. It's got a Tease Picture Wah, a Sarno Earth Drive, an MXR looper box with an MXR Script 100, and then a Maxon 80 900, and then amp. And it looks like there's also a tuner here. I don't know what that's being fed by, or maybe it's just something else, I don't know. So a couple of things. The Road Rage, I don't know the quality of the buffer, so I can't really speak to it. Hopefully it's a 1 meg input impedance and a nice low output impedance. Typically these T-SWAs actually don't do so well with buffers, which may be the reason why you turn it on and off. I would just say leave the buffer on and put the wah first, and then go into the buffer and just leave the buffer on all the time, and then have that run to the subsequent pedals. Now, in terms of the phaser position, I know some people like phase after overdrive and they like to kind of distort it, and then other people like it before where the phase isn't distorted. You may consider messing around with that position if you haven't already. The 80 900 is an amazing delay, but I would say that it has a really high output impedance relative to some of the lower output impedance pedals. So I would definitely recommend getting a buffer at the end of the signal path as well to drive that line back. As far as cables, it looks like you're all soldered here with those Ernie Ball cables. You could, of course, go with something that's lower profile if you wanted, but I have no objections to these as far as the quality of cable. I don't know where the tuner is living in the signal path, but if that's a good quality input buffer, you might be able to just do a Y cable off of the output. And if it's a low output impedance, that parallel loading won't matter. So you could have one side of the Y cable go into the input of the TU12, and then the other side of the Y cable go into the next pedal in the signal path after the buffer. That'd be a good way to be able to basically make a tuner out. And that's basically what a tuner out is. They're just doing that Y internally in the box instead of using a Y cable on the output of the box. So it's really the same thing as what any tuner out would be generally. I see you had a Pedal Power 2 Plus. Because that does have a steel enclosure, it has a little bit more protection against magnetic fields, and you're certainly not drawing that much against it with the pedals that you have here, so you might be okay having that one underneath. I don't know that you'll have a considerable change in terms of noise floor if you upgrade it to a switch mode power supply. I think that this is okay as it is here, so I'm approving of this for the most part in terms of Holy Trinity of tone. You know, I think you got some good things going here. You got soldered cables. You got, I think, a solid signal path. Just a few little things might improve it. Next rig is for Edge Biker. So Edge Biker's got a lot of stuff on here. He's got some serious multi-effects. So he's got his wah, he's got a whammy with a riff step MIDI controller, he's got an overdrive, he's got a Fuzz 1 Nano Big Muff, a Fuzz 2 Russian Big Muff, a digital effects FX8, that's the Axe effects. He's got a Memory Man, and then a Memory Man tap tempo, and then an SDD 3000, the Korg. And then he's got a Big Sky reverb, and then he's got the Deco tape saturation. He's got a Zuma power supply, and he's running the power supplies separately for the Axe effects and for the Memory Man. Okay, and then it looks like he's also got that wah up front. Okay, wah up front I think is a good idea. He's got a Vox wah, vintage style wah. You want to see those up front. He's got the whammy up front too, which I think is a smart idea. Again, that triggers really well the closer it is to the guitar. And then he's got an overdrive, which I'm presuming is, okay, I guess he's saying his overdrive section. He's got his big muff fuzz. He's got those two big muff fuzzes up front. Okay. And he also has a tube screamer on here. I don't know if that's what he means by overdrive, but I would say that if the overdrive is in fact in the signal path before the fuzzes, I would move them after, because if any of these big muffs are sensitive to the low impedance produced by that tube screamer, they're not going to react so favorably. I would say to put the tube screamer after the fuzz pedals would be what I would do. And then that way, you know, you could even put a buffer before that tube screamer, but the tube screamer has a buffer. It's not the best one in the world, but I think it'll be better than nothing to come after those fuzzes and at least convert to some semblance of low impedance. Okay, he's got the Axe effects, which is a great multi-effects. You've got these other devices like the SDD 3000, the Reverb, Strymon. You could use the Strymon as the output buffer if it's set to the buffered mode. That already has 100 ohm output impedance, so that could be, you know, one of those great pedals with high quality built-in buffers, which we've talked about in some of our other videos. That could work. You could also do a separate output buffer there if you wanted to, but I don't think you need to with what you've got. I mean, I'd say overall, in terms of the signal path, I think it's pretty much good. I would just be concerned about where that tube screamer is sitting in relationship to the fuzz stuff. In terms of cables, it looks like you're using soldered cables here throughout. That's a good sign. I like all that. And then Zuma power supply is great, switch mode power supply. Now, if you wanted to fit your Memory Mans on the same power supply, you could get an extension supply from Strymon, and then you could use some of those, because I think the Memory Mans are 24 volts typically. You could use those extension supplies to be able to get the 24 volts at least off of one of them, because you have two 12 volt options on outputs 8 and 9. So you could at least power one of them. I don't know if the tap tempo one also takes 24 volts. That one might take 9, so you might be okay there. I don't recall what the SDD 3000 takes in terms of the power supply needs, but I do know that there's a way that you could consolidate this if you wanted to. Certainly I know that Chalks could do it right off the bat. The Eventide products that are made by Chalks could also do that. It would allow you to pretty much consolidate everything except for the FX8, which I'm pretty sure can't be powered by an ordinary power supply. You could also do something like getting a power strip that you could mount under the board, or do something like with our Vertex pedal boards. We have that power supply module, which is basically like a power strip that gets built into the side of the board. And it looks like you need a little bit bigger board just based on some of these things kind of coming off the board that you have. So that could be a consideration as well, not just one of ours, but there's a dozen different makers that could make something that would allow you to fit all this stuff on the board. But I think overall, you're doing the soldered thing. You got a good power supply. I think for the most part, you have a good order, pending where you would put that Ibanez tube screamer. Just remember that's buffered, so that could affect some of your fuzzes. But I think overall, there's some good choices here. I think there could be some things that could consolidate onto one pedal board. Maybe considering a new pedal board could be an option here. And buffering, I think, using the Strymon is a great built-in buffer. All right, next I got Nelson Capote, and this is a bass rig. From what it seems like, and I like that Nelson put a separate page for his signal path, which is cool. So let's take a look. So the signal path is the Peterson Strobo Stomp coming straight in. Now that has a good quality buffer in it for bass and a higher input impedance, which is more typical of a lot of bass amps. He's got the EHX bass microsynth, the Renin Cuff Fat Funk B always on, Blackstone Appliances MOSFET overdrive, the Line 6 HX Stomp, and the Noble amplification DI. Now, on some of the Noble amps, they have an effects loop. I don't know if this one does, but still a great preamp. In everything that I see on this signal path, I like. I like exactly how this is being run. The Line 6 HX is a great multi-effect here. The Noble amplification has that low Z balanced output. I like kind of everything about what's going on here. The signal path is great. Having that high quality, high input impedance buffer from the Strobo Stomp, I think it's like 2 or 3 megs. That's great for basses. I think that this looks really good overall. Let's see about the cabling. Looks like it's maybe a mix of Ernie Ball molded cables, which are okay. I mean, I think from a consumer standpoint, I think they're fine. I don't think that the tone is gonna be ruined from this. I don't know what the power supply is. Now, some of the Noble DIs have like a paralleled output that you can parallel a bunch of pedals off it. I presume you're not doing that because the Line 6 probably couldn't handle it. But maybe you are, I don't know. I would recommend using an isolated power supply for all this stuff if possible. I think that it would be the quietest possible result, especially since the HX Stomp can be pretty sensitive as a digital effect and may not be so happy with paralleling off of a bunch of other stuff. So that would be one potential space to upgrade. In terms of the buffering, looks good. You know, the Ernie Ball patch cables for what they are, I think are fine. You could of course always upgrade those in the future, and I think making sure that this is an isolated power supply would be a good move if it's not already done. All right, next I got In Galaxy Band. Nice simple board here. So signal path is guitar, Bad Horsey Wah, Rusty Fuzz, Polytune 3, Grunge Distortion, Tube Screamer, GE7. Then gain stage the input of a PV XXL clean channel. Then in the effects loop to a Flamma Mod, Vortex Mini Flanger, Chorus, Flashback Delay, Digi Delay, Hall of Fame Reverb, and then modulation out to amp effects loop return. Cool. So I mean, I think as far as a signal path here, I don't really have any objections to the way that things are being run. The Bad Horsey is not going to be so sensitive to buffering. So if you have an input buffer from the tuner, I would actually, and it does have an input buffer, looks like it has the Bonafide buffer here. I'd put that Bonafide buffer first, then go into your Bad Horsey. And I don't know about the Rusty Fuzz, whether that's impedance sensitive or not. If that is, actually, I'll reverse this order. I'd go Rusty Fuzz, then buffer, then Bad Horsey, then go through the rest of the stuff. I would also recommend potentially putting a buffer after the GE7 before you go into the amp input. Actually, and your Hall of Fame has a low output impedance, so you could actually just turn that onto the trails mode and make sure that that's buffered, and that should be buffering fine back to the return of your effects loop. So I'm in alignment with all that. I don't know what power supply is in here. I can't really see. Hopefully it's a nice quality switch mode power supply. That would be what I'd recommend. In terms of instrument cables and patch cables, you looks like you have some soldered stuff here. I don't recommend those male-to-male connectors. Those can damage your jacks in a lot of cases, and often they have more capacitance than even a 5 or 10 foot cable in some of these instances. So they're actually not saving you cable length. They can do damage to your pedals because there's nowhere for the jacks to move or the pedals to move, especially when taking them on and off. I don't think it's a good, reliable way to do it, so I would remove those and put actual cables there if at all possible. But otherwise, I think things are good here. I think you just need to make sure you got a switch mode power supply, if you don't already, that's isolated. And I would upgrade all those cables to soldered cables, just like you have in some of the other places, like between the Rusty Fuzz and the Wah, or coming in on the Vortex or on the Corona chorus input. I think those are the types of cables at a minimum that you want to be using, or you could use some of the pre-made cables like the Ernie Ball stuff that you've seen, or use our DIY diagram and do some of those same tricks and techniques that we've been using. All right, next is Mick Hodes. Mick's got a cool rig. He's got, starting first with a buffer tuner from the Polytune, then the SP compressor, Wah, Pog, Telegraph, Octave, Full Tone Octave, Rotovibe, King of Tone, KTR, Dumbleoid, Centura, Green Russian Muff, Strymon Volante, Bell Epoch, and then Flint at the end for reverb. He's got the Pedal Power 3 Plus. Okay, well, first of all, great power supply. The Pedal Power 3 Plus is Voodoo Labs' newest power supply. It is fully switch mode. I fully approve of that power supply. In terms of the cabling here, it looks like he's got soldered cables. It looks like these are kind of like the Amazon special ones that are kind of so-so. I don't know if it's Mogami cable, but some of the soldering I've seen on those has been speculative. I've actually seen where the ground wire isn't soldered at all. It's just braided and then pushed up against the inside of the housing, and then it's relying on the sort of the tensioning of the back of the housing in order to create the ground connection to the actual plug. I don't know if these are those exact ones, but I've seen ones like that that are kind of so-so. I would recommend, if you can at some point, potentially upgrading those, because you have so much value in gear here. Why go cheap on the cables? You have several $1,000s worth of pedals. Why not invest at least a few hundred in getting really nice cables? That would be one suggestion I'd make. Power supply is great. In terms of order, I would actually move a few things around. I wouldn't put the buffer tuner up front, because you got some stuff here that's not gonna like that actual low impedance. I would move the octave fuzzes, I would move the big muff fuzz all into the beginning of the chain with the wah. So I could go like wah, fuzzes, so that would be the big muff and your octave fuzz. I'm not sure if the triple graph is impedance sensitive or not. You'd have to do that test yourself to see. That could also potentially go before. Then after the wah, then I would get into like your POG, because you want that to be close to the guitar to track that well. I'd then go into compressor. I think your overdrive signal chain is probably just fine, depending on the level of gain. Again, as I said earlier, I like to go the greatest amount of distortion closer to the guitar and the least amount of distortion furthest from the guitar. And then I think the way that you're ending it with the Volante, Bell Epoch, and Flint is just fine. As I'd mentioned before, with pedals with high quality built-in buffers, the Flint is definitely one of those. Being a Strymon, has a nice low 100 ohm output impedance. As long as that's set to buffered mode, that'll be just fine to drive the line back to the amplifier, either in mono or in stereo, depending on how this rig is being run. So overall, I think some upgrades to the patch cables could be in order, especially given the value of everything that's on here. I think the signal path could be rearranged to put some of the potential impedance sensitive stuff like the fuzz, the wah, the octave fuzz before the buffer, and then put that buffer after that. So a few adjustments there, but overall pretty minor stuff. I think overall this is a cool rig. It's got some cool pedals, and I think that just with a few slight changes, this could really be a pretty magical, quiet, reliable board. All right, next we have Dre Bishwap. Current rig, he's got a VP Junior volume pedal, a click tuner, Philosopher's Tone compressor, Pomeroy boost and OD, Foxcatcher OD, Scarlet Love OD, Simplifier preamp, Specular Tempest, Collider. Okay, and that's in the effects loop. Okay, so first thing I'd say here is I generally don't like the idea of going into a volume pedal first. Now, I understand that this is personal preference, but putting a volume pedal first is basically just replicating what the guitar volume pots are already doing on the guitar itself. So you're really duplicating something that is already in existence in your guitar. The other problem with putting this here is that the loading of using a volume pedal right after the guitar, even if it's a 250K pot, which I'm presuming this one is, it's still going to create some amount of tone suck. So unless you have a buffered volume pedal or a buffer before that volume pedal, you're going to be running into some amount of tone suck. So if you like putting the volume pedal first, I recommend that you hit a buffer first on the input before you go into that volume pedal, and we have lots of recommended input buffers in the description below. The click tuner after the volume pedal is fine. I presume that's just a true bypass tuner. Philosopher's Tone looks good. The Pomeroy looks good. Foxcatcher good. Scarlet Overdrive. Again, just putting those in an order. I like to put them in most gain to least gain in terms of the relationship to the guitar. And then it goes into the simplifier, and then you're using the effects loop of the simplifier to go to the Specular Tempest and Collider. I think that those are all fine to put in that effects loop. It's basically putting them after sort of the preamp stage of the simplifier, just like you would in a normal amplifier. And then you're going stereo out via XLR, those two balanced outputs. You're using the simplifier as the output buffer. It's already balanced and low impedance, so you have no need to use an output buffer. I would just recommend putting that input buffer up front. Now, if you wanted to put the volume pedal in a place that I think would make the most sense, either one, putting it right before you go into the simplifier, or putting it on the effects send of the simplifier, but it would require, for best performance, that you get the 25K version of the Ernie Ball, which they call active, although it's not powered, but it was designed for active pickups, hence the 25K pot in there, which just works a little bit better with low output impedance signals, which I'm presuming the effects loop on the simplifier is. I don't see information here about the power supply, so I'm not sure. Hopefully this is a high quality isolated switch mode power supply. And it looks, from what I can see, that these are using soldered cables throughout. I don't know about what the cable type is. That's all good, and I think that I don't have any objections there as to what would be going on as far as the sound quality of the cabling affecting anything. I also see an EQ there. I don't know where that's located. I would presume that would go somewhere either after the overdrives or potentially after the send if you wanted to affect the preamp of the simplifier a little bit to kind of have an added EQ. All right, next one we got is from Fabro Buitre from Mexico City. This rig is the Hulk Buster signal path. It's got a guitar comes in, goes to a volume pedal tuner, goes to a Joe Bonamassa Crybaby, Fuzz Face, Badstone, Gemini Chorus, Blues Driver, Penny Saver Royale, Interstellar Delay, and then Buffer Del Sol, Super Hard-On, and then the amp. And it's all powered by a Fuel Tank Junior and an Ernie Ball Volt. So I think first of all, I think the Ernie Ball Volt is switch mode. I think the Fuel Tank Junior is linear. I would consider going to all switch mode if it's underneath the board as it appears to be here. It looks like most of these connections are soldered with kind of a potpourri of cables. If you could standardize to something high quality like Mogami, I would suggest it if possible. Again, it's fairly inexpensive comparatively to most cables, especially if you're building it yourself. One thing about the VP tuner is I believe that it is active. And so in this position, it is going to be producing a low output impedance signal that's going to all of these fuzz and wah devices. So I would actually recommend going JB Crybaby, then Fuzz Face, then the chorus for some people could go before overdrive or after overdrive, depending on your preference. Let's just presume here that for this particular person, he likes the chorus before any of the distortion pedals. Man, the Penny Savers, I think it's got overdrive and chorus in it, so you got chorus, then overdrive, then chorus in this situation. I guess if you like that, you could go for it. I would more be in alignment with going Blues Driver, Penny Saver, and then Gemini Chorus, and then going into the Interstellar Delay. If there's a buffer here, I would actually put it at the very end and then put the Super Hard-On before that, or even potentially put the Super Hard-On before some of the overdrives or just after the last overdrive, so that it can be just a good overall boost for the overdrives, unless you're planning on using the Super Hard-On as a buffer. But I think it has a fairly high output impedance and a really high input impedance as well. So I don't know that it would be doing so well for that. The Buffer Del Sol I'm not aware of. I don't know what the specs are. Preferably this is a 100 ohm output impedance on this. But I think overall the biggest takeaway for this rig is to really get that buffer in the Ernie Ball tuner out of that position. It should really be after any of the fuzz stuff or impedance sensitive stuff. All right, this one is for Ryan White 0, and he's got a switcher on this one, a disaster area switcher. He's got Walrus Audio Deep 6, JHS Cheeseball, Paul C. Timmy, JHS Superbolt, JHS Kilt, 1981 Inventions DRV, BYOC OD2, an open loop, and then he's got a timeline, a New Neighbor Wet Reverb Expanse, and then an HX Stomp with an EB Tech Hum Eliminator. Built on an old trailer trash pedal board. We don't know about the power supply. So far I think everything looks pretty good. I think the cheese ball, I feel like it's based on a love tone pedal maybe, and I don't remember whether that's impedance sensitive or not. If it is, then there may be a consideration there to even put it before any buffers if they're buffered loops. I think that there is a buffer on the input of the disaster area, so there could be a case to be made to even put that before there if it is impedance sensitive. But even so, I would probably move the compressor after it. Just dynamically sometimes with fuzzes. I would play around with that. In terms of the overdrive selection, it looks like it's going more low gain to high gain. I'd actually reverse that, or at least vet it out to see how those combinations do, because again, when you're trying to boost into already gained up pedals, it doesn't typically sound as good to me, and that's generally I think a best practice thing. I think the open loop is a smart idea if you wanted to add something new in there. Always a good idea. And then putting the volume pedal before the HX Stomp I think is a good idea. That way you can have control of all of your gain pedals and be able to shut those off before you go into your time-based pedals, which I'm presuming the HX Stomp is doing. And then having the timeline and the New Neighbor in there. And then the hum eliminator is kind of an interesting thing. I know a lot of people like to use them to try to gate out some noise. I would say that for stuff like this, if you're really getting hum and you need to deal with it, you really should be using a high quality isolation or isolated output, some sort of isolation transformer. I think the best one out there is probably the Lely. Has a P split, which has an isolated output, or they also have just one, I think that's just called the ISO or isolator, that's just a single in and out that creates an isolated output. And realistically, if you're getting hum, if you're running stereo on this thing, it would be better off in most cases, because of the way these transformers are designed, to actually put the isolation at the side of the amp. So having that box live on top of the amp and then just have a short cable coming out of it going into the amp after the pedal board cable has reached that isolation unit. Now, if you want to do it on the board, you could still do that. Sometimes it can not be as effective at eliminating any of that that ground noise. But ideally, you really need to have something that has some sort of isolation galvanically. That could again be the Lely. Radial also has some things, I think they're called the Stage Bug, that could work. I haven't found the EB Tech stuff or the hum eliminators or the HumX stuff to actually be that effective. And in some cases, the ones that plug into the electrical outlets aren't even UL certified. They actually, in some cases, can be dangerous because of what they're doing and how they're separating the grounds there. So I don't typically recommend this product if you really want to get something that's really solving the problem at its root cause. Again, galvanic isolation being the way to do that, and having a high quality transformer that's not going to affect the sound or create any sort of distortion. And a lot of the transformers do have some artifacts when you're running a lot of signal through them, and will distort, especially in the low end, in a displeasing way comparatively to the non-isolated output. Let's say if you're running a left and right stereo output and the left is not isolated and the right is, a lot of these transformers, when you compare them side by side, will create a artifact to the sound that is not ideal. I don't know on this one what the power supply is, so I can't really speak to that. Hopefully, again, it's an isolated switch mode supply. It looks like these are all solder connections using something like a Mogami cable, so I approve of all that. I think it looks really good. The layout looks really clean to me. I think that this person overall did a really good job. You know, you might consider running an output buffer, even though it's all running through the HX effects or the HX stomp here, because the output impedance isn't that low on that one. I think it's 500 or 700 ohms. You could consider getting a stereo output buffer. Something maybe even that has isolation. I know we're releasing our buffer interface boxes, which do have that fully isolated output with a transformer and a polarity switch and all that stuff that could be built in. That could even be stashed underneath this board potentially. So there are options like that out there that you could do, or you could build our DIY buffer interface box, and I can provide you a link to how to wire in an isolation transformer at the end. You could even do that on a DIY processor. Just add that in as a separate, just isolated output with the transformer, and have the buffer from the HX driving that. And I'll include a link to that in the description, in fact. So if people want to do that and they already have a good output buffer and they want that isolated output, they can do that. I'll link the materials and how to wire that in a diagram in the description below. So that was several pedal boards that came to us through social media that were tagged, and we're asking for advice. And this is, again, something that I want to do on an ongoing basis. Again, we offer these services, again, through Patreon and through therigdr.com for people that want to pay to have us consult along these lines in even more depth. But really the main thing to understand here, no matter which one of these rigs we talked about, or whether this was one of your rigs or something that you might implement into your own rig at home, is really observing those three tenets of the Holy Trinity of Tone. High quality soldered patch cables throughout, using a high quality switch mode isolated power supply, and using high quality buffers first and last, pending that you don't have any impedance sensitive stuff like fuzzes. Those would then go before the buffer, and then the buffer would come after. For the most part, I think people who were tagging us in these photos had done a pretty good job. There were maybe a couple signal path things that we talked about that could be adjusted, or placements of the buffer relative to other pedals that they had to get the most out of them. But all in all, I think people are doing a really good job, and I'm glad to see that people are implementing a lot of these processes and are able to get that onto their rig, because it's just going to make the rig more reliable, sound better and closer to the sound of your guitar, plugged directly into the amp, even if you're running through a bunch of stuff. and really make something that is going to be something that you're excited to play, that inspires you, and you're not spending time trying to rewire it or move stuff around to get rid of noise or get it to work reliably. These are great things that you can do. Now, if you love what you saw today, I highly recommend that you give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment again, tell us about maybe some extra areas that we could have even offered more advice on some of these rigs, or things that you might implement on some of these rigs that we talked about today. And tell us about the rig that you're running. Maybe we can have you add a link to one of your pedal boards in the description so we could talk about that in a future video where maybe we're doing some critiques and offering some advice to rigs. Again, this is something that I want to do as a recurring segment that maybe we do every couple months so that we can go through some rigs that are out there and give some advice for free on how to maybe improve them. If you want to support us further, of course, we have our Rig Doctor podcast. It's available for free on all the podcatchers. We also, again, have paid services on Patreon and therigdr.com, as well as pre-made products like our guitar cables, our instrument cables, our power cables, or you can head over to vertexeffects.com where we offer all of our individual pedals for sale and all the dealerships which carry them. This way you can find an approved dealer that's near you. That goes a long way in supporting us. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Mason Marangella from Vertex Effects, aka the Rig Doctor, and I hope you enjoyed some of the advice that we gave today, and I hope that that's something that you can implement into your own rig. Until next time, see you later.